For those folks that are joining us today, thank you. We have everyone from all types of different sizes of retail stores and also all around the world. And so I wanted to thank everybody for coming today to talk with us, Titan Cloud, really about a very fluid topic, which is inventory variance and specifically inventory control. All right. So I'm Nick Viola, so the Director of Solution Consulting. I've helped companies over the years within the fuel industry, supply chain, transportation, technology, really transform their business, solving valuable problems. And one of those valuable problems today, which we'll be talking about again, is inventory variance. And Trevor Hopman is going to be joining us as well. So Trevor, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I'm a solutions consultant here at Titan Cloud. So I've also got a broad range of experiences. I started in engineering. I've worked in business consulting, supply chain management, and now I'm really focused on helping companies optimize their business through technology. So thank you for joining in today.
Inventory control. All right. Trevor and I are going to guide you on this journey, starting off with write-offs. Why are write-offs so important? How does that impact your business? And then really what the next topic is going to be around control. Specifically, why is it so hard to really understand what's going on with that wet stock or that liquid inventory and really not only control it from a financial standpoint, but from an operational and compliance standpoint as well. Then we're going to walk through Titan Cloud, how we would approach this in terms of our solution, looking towards the future, really using data and analytics to be able to maintain that control over your inventory. And then we'll walk through at the very end a case study that we have from one of our customers. And we'll also save some time for Q&A. All right. So with that, we're going to kick off just high level what we see within the industry. So several reports have come out saying that over the next couple of years through 2026, we're going to see flat to declining fuel sales. You know, there's lots of reasons behind it. We also see that macroeconomics, there's a lot of pressures from trade to inflation, and really it's harnessing the wallet of the consumer, as well as there's a major shift in not only EVs, but also fuel efficiency. So from a total market standpoint, we really see that there are headwinds for the fuel industry that are going to have people coming less to the stores. They're going to be fueling up less. They're going to be coming less into the C-store, in-store to buy those goods because they're just strapping their wallet a little tighter. And so what does this really mean for you as a retail C-store owner?
Yeah, so what this means is, you need to capture as much value as possible. So one way you can do that is by reducing your inventory write-off, which we know impedes competitive advantage. So I'm sure most of you know what an inventory write-off is. For those of you who may not, a write-off occurs when you purchase a good in an attempt to sell it, and so you place it in your inventory, and then when you go to reconcile the ins and outs, and then you have a physical count, there's less inventory than you would expect, than what your book says, right? So you have to file a write-off to get that inventory out of your accounting system. Okay, so this can have a huge impact on your business. We asked operators in the industry from the mid-market and enterprise, how big is their write-off as a percent of sales? And this is what we found. So we saw that around 20% of the industry had a write-off smaller than 1%, but close to 60% of the mid-market and almost 50% of enterprise businesses had a write-off greater than 1% of their revenue. So that's a very substantial amount. And then another large portion didn't understand their write-off. So they either didn't have enough data. This was close to 25% of the industry. And another 3 to 11% simply just did not know the size of their write-off. Okay, so this sounds significant. Nick, could you talk us through how this impacts the business? What does this mean for people?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great study that was done to really see how companies really view or have their inventory write-offs. And what we see within the market is first, profitability really comes from in-store sales, but top line is going to actually come from the fuel side. And so when we're in this industry, along with those headwinds that we discussed earlier, profitability is key to investing in your current infrastructure or expanding through either acquisitions or building new. And so with these write-offs, let's just say that you have about 1,000 stores, $3 a gallon. You could have upwards of $30 million in write-offs. And then if you have 100 stores, you just take a factor off of that, so 3 million. And so that's directly impacting your bottom line. Now, there's probably questions of like, okay, are these write-offs real? What's happening? Ultimately, your financials are how you make decisions within your business. And so if they're not reflected correctly, that's going to have a massive impact in how you actually, one, control your operations today and your inventory, but two, really as a business as a whole, how do you actually make those decisions correctly without the right information? All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the teams that really care about what's going on with inventory variance and that are ultimately impacted, they have to take some type of action, or they have there's some consequence because of that variance. We see it grouped into four basic areas around compliance and operations, accounting, and maintenance. And each of these teams have different goals, right? The compliance side, you want to stay compliant. You want to make sure there aren't any leaks, you don't have any fines, you don't have any NOVs. Operations, you're trying to maximize your fuel sales while also maximizing fuel margin, right? How much throughput can you have, and how profitable can you be? On the accounting side, you're trying to make sure that all that matches on both the P&L and the balance sheet to ensure that you can go as a business make the right decisions. And then maintenance, what you're trying to do is keep that uptime, really working closely with the operations and environmental side, and you're trying to operate at the lowest cost possible. But all of you have that impact from that inventory variance, from different types of thresholds to delivery accuracies and sales, and again, understanding your P&L, understanding your balance sheet, and even your cash flow statement. And then for maintenance, how do you know if you're told to go investigate inventory variance? Do you do a meter calibration? Is there a leak that you need to fix that also impacts compliance? Is there a blender issue, right? So identifying what actually is causing that variance is very, very difficult. And so we're gonna put out a poll here, and it's going to be about how well do these goals and challenges align with your role in your company and organization.
Extremely aligned. Getting some answers
Okay,
coming
we got
in.
one answer. I think that coffee's kicking in. All right, a couple answers coming in. Aligned.
People are paying attention.
Okay,
There we go.
good. Yeah. All right. So I think it's accurate to say that in general this is what operations and organizations are seeing throughout their industry.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nick. You can really see it is a business wide problem. Okay, so we talked about the sides of the problem. How an inventory write off can impact your business. Nick, you did a great job talking about who cares about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk now about how the issue occurs. How does this happen inside your business? And we can kind of look at it from two lenses. So what does your book look like versus what happens in reality? So your book inventory, this is really calculated with one in and one out. So the in, a BOL that starts at the terminal, and you have some sort of transport truck lifting product at the terminal and dropping in your tank. the BOL from the terminal is what gets entered in your back office. Okay, and then we have the outs. The outs are going to come from your forecourt sales. Okay, so that comes from your POS system, and your book inventory sounds pretty simple: one in, one out. In reality, these should always equal out, and there should not be a write-off. But as we know, these two almost never are equal, and that's why we're talking here today. So Nick, what are some issues and reasons that what happens in reality?
Yeah, well, reality is complicated, as most people probably know. And what's interesting, everything within this system is inherently designed to lose fuel, starting with temperature and evaporation. So temperature, 1 degree of temperature change has a 0.07% impact on volume. So what does that mean? So in a 10,000 gallon tank, that's 7 gallons in variance that you can see, and it can swing either way. On top of that, typically what we see between the delivery, the fuel in the transport side to the tank, there's about a 10-degree difference. So this could end up being 70 gallons of unaccounted for variance that you don't know. And you're going to say, oh, the ATG has temperature correction. Well, it takes about 2 hours for that fuel to actually equalize that temperature throughout. So you have customers that are pumping fuel at the same time, that the volume's going in and temperature's changing. So it's very difficult to actually see that 70 gallons with that temperature change. Now, outside of that, there could be anywhere from a retain. So you're trying to match this delivery, but it wasn't the full delivery that you ordered, or that you're shorted, or that the truck actually showed up to the wrong location, and now you're trying to match all this data and understand, well, where did this delivery come from? Then we have our actual ATG. You're doing one inventory reading a day, and it's from a tank chart in this ATG that we've seen 50+% in the market that we've seen have 4 or less points programmed into an ATG. And we're going to go over in detail of like why ATGs are actually, those tank charts are incorrect. There could be anything from a stuck probe, or you do testing, or you're changing out, doing some maintenance on the probe, and it's not put back in the exact spot. Again, inherent loss within the system. There's meter drift. There's blender drift. So if you're mixing a mid-grade or diesel and biodiesel, those pieces of equipment drift over time. There could be theft, or even in the IT world, you map a meter incorrectly and you don't have registered sales. And then the thing that we all don't want, especially from the compliance side, are leaks. So what this means really is that there's a loss in revenue. So if you don't have the fuel, you can't sell it, which ultimately is going to impact your costs. And this inventory write-off remains. There's a lot of places where variance can happen, and it's really, really difficult to find out exactly why is that variance happening. And so there's going to be another poll question that's going to come up, and it's going to be around BOLs. So there's a statement on here, and I didn't want to be so absolute, that less than 1% of BOLs match ATG readings. Okay, and that's we're getting in a couple answers here. So how often does your delivery BOL match the ATG reading? Sometimes, yeah. So if your ATG reading always, oh my goodness, that's I would love to talk to the respondent of that. If it always matches to the exact gallon, that is great. What we've seen in the market is very rare, and it happens because there's all these different points of where you can have these different types of variances, from temperature to the delivery to meter drift to theft to leaks to blender drift, IT issues. Okay, so let's go to breaking down the problem, and we're going to start with the tank charts. Now, here's another fact. So for every 1/8 of an inch error in your tank chart, there is going to be approximately 20 gallons of variance. So even with a 99% accurate tank, and we'll call it a 10,000 gallon tank, this could be up to 200 gallons of variance that you have with a 99% accurate tank chart. Now, let's go into why tank charts aren't actually 99% accurate. And it's really going to start with understanding how tanks are made, what a tank chart is, where does it come from, and then also the state of the industry. So starting with tank chart, there's a basic formula here, but essentially there's a manufacturer that says, all right, based on these dimensions, based on how we produce this, for each inch within that tank, it should correlate to some type of volume. So the tank chart is inherently assuming that the manufacturing process is completely flawless, right? There's no errors or anything within the manufacturing. That tank is made exactly to specifications. And as I said earlier, reality is very complicated. It's not always true. Then when you go install the tank, it could be on a slight tilt. It could be compressed just ever so slightly. There, over time, we're going to look at, and Trevor's going to walk us through here in a second, that there could be other types of things going into these inaccuracies. But as you compress this and you see that there's manufacturing defects, there's installation errors, that ultimately is causing these minor differences in what the manufacturer decided. And then on top of that, to compound the problem even further, if you go acquire a new location, not all 10,000 gallon tanks are equal. So how do you know what is the right tank chart to put in there? And that's even just assuming that the tank chart is correct. Okay, so lots of places, just very, very beginning, that tank charts are just inherently wrong. And then, as I said before, we've seen that over 50% of the ATGs within the market have 4 or less points programmed into them. So this is typically the norm. However, what's happening? So what does 4 points actually mean? So it's really giving the ATG these set points, these different areas, where it's going to look at the tank chart and it's going to do some math, and it's going to say, hey, based on these areas that you've programmed, we're going to interpolate. So in between the points, we're going to assume that there's some math difference between here, and we'll correlate those inches to volume. And then anything outside of those points, we're going to extrapolate or just estimate based on that curve of those points where it should be, right? So all of this is just inherent. This is what programming is doing, and because the ATG can't take thousands of points, which again leads to further inaccuracies within your tank charts. Mm-hmm. And so Trevor's going to take us through some compaction here and what that really means.
Yeah, very good, Nick. So this is an example of how compaction or distortion in your tank can impact your volume reading. Okay, so if we look at a horizontal splice of a tank, let's say, for example, this green box in the bottom is some sort of sludge buildup, indentation, something that's altering the volume of the tank. Okay, if you think about how the ATG is taking its measurement, like Nick said, it's just an inch reading, and it's assuming the gallons associated with that inch. So it's not going to detect this slight compaction of 149 gallons. I like to think of it as like a Coke bottle, right, or a water bottle. So you have fluid, or a coffee mug. Yeah, if you can squeeze a coffee mug, mine will break. But yeah. So you hold up your water bottle. You can squeeze it, and the water level rises, but the volume inside of the container is constant. And that is kind of how your ATG is operating. So it's interpolating the volume based on an inch reading. and it's not going to experiences like compaction, sludge buildup, and tilt. And when you think of 149 gallons, that if you're reconciling inventory every day, that adds up. So let's look at an example of what a real tank looks like. All right, so down here on the bottom right, this is an example of an extremely distorted tank. Its a liner is peeling and there's sludge buildup, but this is what tanks can look like in the ground. And in reality, they have thousands of imperfections that the ATG can just not take into consideration, right? So you can reprogram the ATG with the original tank chart, but you're never going to catch these issues. And what we see is customers before using some of the solutions we're going to talk about, they're spending money sending the site to reprogram, and they're trying different ways to solve this issue, but they don't realize that the tank chart they believe to be correct has some errors in it. Okay, so what do you do? I mean, we talked about the problems with a typical tank chart. Well, one of the ways you can address this issue is with sophisticated technology, and you can build a digital tank chart, right? So what a digital tank chart is going to be is a digital representation and a restrapping, a recreation of that manufacturer tank chart, and it utilizes advanced technology and algorithms to achieve this. All right, so your typical tank chart is considering four points. A digital tank chart can consider upwards of 40 to 50,000 inventory reading measurements. Okay, so how do you create the digital tank chart? Well, first off, what you need is a digital platform. Okay, so you need a fuel platform that's considering all of the ins and outs of your tank, right? So it's going to be the BOL and delivery readings, all of the leaks and alarms that the ATG is triggering, the sales data from the POS system. Okay, and so now you have all the data, and the next step is to increase the polling frequency. So you can increase your polling frequency with sophisticated technology up to somewhere around 5 seconds, and you're consistently monitoring the tank to build out this digital tank chart. Okay, and what it's going to do, and Nick, and we'll talk through this in the next couple slides, it's going to drastically reduce variance up front, but it's going to peel back the layer of temperature and anomalies and allow you to see the real root cause to your inventory variance, real fuel loss, like leaks that are smaller than the ATG tolerance, theft, meter drift. Okay, so this is the first step you need to take in addressing the inventory variance issues. Nick, is there anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I think this is really building out the start, which we'll get to. We're going to put all these pieces together and what this looks like and how we see companies taking action. And so I think in the next side, so if we have the tank chart built, we have more accurate readings of that specific tank chart. So we know that a certain level is a certain volume. We need to also take into account that temperature. And so what we're showing here is that there's some temperature volume. This is the bottom chart, or temperature reading over time. That's the bottom chart. And so there's variations intraday or intraday, and then over a longer period of time. And that top chart, what we're looking at, all those green vertical lines are deliveries. So again, going back to still, it takes approximately 2 hours for for that temperature to equalize between the dropped volume and the already established volume in the tank. And so the yellow and gray lines, those are the variance that you see within the tank. So as you go down, we actually are losing volume, as you see throughout here. And that's the raw reading and adjusted reading from temperature. So those are essentially temperature adjusted. Now, with using some advanced analytics around thermodynamics and how heat is actually exchanged between fuel based on volume and the temperature differences, we end up getting this red line. So you can still see there is a loss, and losses do happen over time. Again, it's just inherent in the system between evaporation and some meter drift. But you see that that curve is much more smoothed out, and that's really what we're trying to get. So now we've tackled the how do you get a more accurate tank chart to ensure that you know what level equates to what volume. We're accounting for the specific temperature, how that impacts the changes in volume of your fuel. And then putting those two pieces together, this is a view of what it looks like across, let's say, a given month. And so the gray line, that is going to be before using advanced analytics and understanding what's happening with the temperature, understanding a better view of what Trevor described as a digital tank chart, so that more accurate reading. So the gray line is what we see companies dealing with today. So to orient you in what's happening, we have positive variance above that line, that's 0, and we have negative variance below that line. And so over time, this is cumulative variance. So how much are you tracking? And that gray line, again, that's before you use any advanced analytics. You use the thermodynamic equations and analytics around how does the fuel heat transfer actually occur within that time frame, and you can account for those volume changes as your customers are pumping out fuel. And the result is going to be this yellow and red line. Now, before you have a solution that gets you more accurate tank charts, more accurate temperature readings, what's going on? So when you have positive variance, think about this with Trevor's example of the Coke bottle, right? So as your customers are pumping fuel out, they pump out 10 gallons, but because you're dropping so dramatically, that Coke bottle got a lot thinner. The inventory change could be, it's 10 gallons, the inventory reading could say 15. So you're actually gaining some fuel from there, right? When you get a delivery, so this is the green line, this is saying they dropped 1,000 gallons or whatever it may be, whatever the number. But the inventory reading, right? Your BOL says 1,000, but your inventory reading could say 1,200. So where did it go? What happened? So we have these inherent gains and losses throughout the system. And why does this matter, right? So at the beginning of the month, let's say we start at 0, and each day you're taking your inventory variance and you're accumulating it over that time, and you close the month at some different inventory level, there's going to be a variance. What happens? What do teams do? They go calibrate meters. They go check alarms. And so we're going to push out a poll right here, and we're going to see when inventory variance happens within your organization, what actions do you take, right? You have inventory variance. How do you go figure out what's going on? How do you know that you bought the right amount, that was delivered, that you're not giving away fuel, that you don't have leaks? Meter drift calibration. That's exactly what we see. Yeah. Oh, IT review, great. Are these meters mapped correctly? Yeah. Everybody has a couple different first actions, right? And it's you're going to what you think you know. But think about this. Meter drift, it could happen. So meter drift, the annual drift is between 0.2 and 0.5%. About 5% to 10% of meters drift per year, which means that if you have 1,000 locations, about 1 billion gallons a year, that's 100,000 gallons in which you're giving away. On top of that, how do you know that you actually have a leak as well, right? There's all this variance here. You're taking one inventory reading a day from an inaccurate tank chart. The CSLD is trying to calculate if you have 0.1 gallons per hour, that's small of a leak. What if it's smaller? That's 2.4 gallons a day. What if that leak's smaller? You're not going to get an alarm. It's very difficult with all these different variances to pinpoint exactly what the problem is, even with the technology that we have today. It's very, very difficult. So what we're saying, let's reduce that cumulative variance and bring in more analytics to really understand what's happening, so that you're not just sending out a calibration, or you're not having an entire team deep dive alarms and release detection, or that you're sending the IT, because IT has a ton of projects outside of just fuel. So this is what we're seeing in the market in terms of, what's happening today, what could be possible with our technology. And so this is another example. Because we have that temperature, because we have the accurate digital tank chart, we've seen customers go from just under a 95% match rate, right? They have some variance and tolerance, 200 gallons, give or take, for this delivery to match. And we've seen them actually go from 95 to almost, 100%, 99.7. And so now you've matched those deliveries, you can mark that variance off. This is not a delivery variance, right? And you can go pinpoint past that. Okay, if it's not delivery, what else could it be? And Trevor's going to walk us through a couple more.
Yeah, so we talked about giving you more visibility. So once you pull out the temperature variance, and we've got a much more accurate tank chart, now you've reduced the variance initially by a large amount. We'll talk through a customer example. You shrink the overall variance, and now you can determine the real root cause of the remaining variance. Okay, so the next step is isolating anomalies. So our technology will tell you, is this, there's still variance left. Is it due to theft? Is it due to meter drift? Is it due to a leak that your ATG didn't detect? Okay, so now what operators can do is go take action on the right issues. Okay, so this will reduce your operating expenses and your time spent on resolving these issues. Okay, so we know, if we bring it back to the teams that you've talked so much about, each team can see the issues that pertain to them. So compliance, they care about the leaks. Operations might care about meter drift. They're worried about keeping revenue as high as possible. And, accounting is worried about the write-off in general. So this is bringing insight to help you solve the problem sooner and make sure you're solving the right problems within your business.
Exactly. And that's that control that companies don't necessarily have today, right? We have an immediate first action, variance. Let's go calibrate. Let's go look at alarms. Let's review with IT. Mm-hmm. There's other actions that you can take. Now let's pinpoint exactly that. And here's another issue that we've seen. Again, there's meter drift. There's also blender drift. There's an extreme example at the bottom, but if you're mixing, your unleaded regular with premium, you have some ratio. Well, those blenders, they drift over time, they fail. And that means that you could potentially be giving away more of your premium fuel. Great for the customer. They get more premium, not mid-grade. But bad for you, right? So that's dollars not coming in for the premium, which ultimately ends up as more costs because you're losing that inventory variance. And this isn't a meter drift problem. This is a blender drift problem. And we've been able to help identify exact blenders which are giving the issues to ensure that companies are, increasing that revenue, making sure that customers are paying for that premium fuel, and which ultimately impacts those costs. Which again, going to Trevor's point, now you know what this variance is coming from and what's causing it. You can directly tackle that problem without having to go, take a hammer when a screwdriver is good enough, right? Hopefully that analogy.
No, that's perfect.
I do a lot of home projects, right? So.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's spending too much money and hours on something that could be solved with a different, cheaper, quicker way.
Yeah.
So let's look at, you know, a customer example, and what does this do inside of your business? What can solving these challenges and regaining control of your inventory through technology, what can it do for your business? So we had a customer with a very strategic and a very large inventory variance problem. Okay, so this was up to the executive level. They were spending 1,500 hours a year trying to understand their inventory variance problem, which was their write-off was $3.5 million. Okay, so what we did, the first step we take, just like we walked you through, is fix the tank chart. All right, so we moved them to a digital tank chart for all of their tanks and recalibrate. Now we're recalibrating the inventory readings. We're removing temperature, and that reduced their inventory variance, their write-off, by 84% of the gate. Okay, and then after we reduced the write-off 84%, now we're able to, like we said, isolate the anomalies for the remaining inventory variance that still exists. Okay, so this resulted in productivity improvements, 15 to 25% in this example. It reduces your maintenance spend because you're making less trips to the site. You're not spending dollars on things that don't need to be fixed. Okay, and then to take it a step further, the BOL reconciliation piece, this reduced your fuel costs, because when we're matching BOLs to almost 100% accuracy, you're not paying for fuel that you didn't get. Okay, and you're not spending time investigating the BOL discrepancies. Okay, the last thing, you know, was increase their fuel throughput and revenue. Okay, so by addressing meter drift sooner, now you're actually selling the product that you paid for in the first place. Okay, so 0.1 to 0.3% revenue gains just from addressing this issue. Yeah, this took their overall write-off down to $560,000 a year, and we drastically reduced their hours spent on this issue of inventory variance. And you can see, you know, we talk about this being a business-wide problem. Each team is seeing impacts here. Okay, so the operations team, they're seeing revenue improvements due to fixing meter drift and selling the product they paid for. Compliance is detecting the leaks that need addressing, and they're spending less time finding those leaks. Maintenance is getting the right problem solved and spending less time doing so as well. And then the accounting team and the CFO, the write-off has shrunk drastically. They're getting their problem solved as well. Okay, so lots of success that we can see with using this digital technology, and it does have a large impact on your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Trevor, super appreciate that. You hit on all the right points, covering all those teams, the specific goals that they're going after, and how do we help them do that? Why it's so complicated to do it today? So I want to say first, thank you so much for everybody showing up and interacting with us. And we look forward to speaking with everybody at some later date.